Welcome to another edition of Film Seizure at the Movies. I am Jeff Harbuckle. I'm the co-host of the weekly podcast Film Seizure and the host of Monster Mondays, both of which you can find here at filmseizure.com. This time out, I am looking at the brand new Sony Pictures Marvel Studio film Venom, There Be Carnage. And this stars Tom Hardy, Woody Harrelson, and Michelle Williams, and is actually directed by Andy Serkis. This sequel picks up a little bit after the 2018's Venom, which was a little bit of a surprise hit. Part of that is that it feels like Sony was mostly maybe trying to cash in on whatever they could with the various Spider-Man characters that they had under their kind of contracted control. And that was probably, or at least if we went with that thought, maybe that was to bolster the likely eventual asking price for Marvel to kind of retake full control over all of the characters on that side of the universe. And the other part was that it doesn't quite get the same fanfare as a Spider-Man movie would for that character himself. Sure, Venom is a big character in Spider-Man's comics, having made a huge splash in the late 80s, which laid the tracks for you not to be able to escape the character in the 90s, which led to the eventual creation of tons of characters that were like Venom. Another part was that the first Venom film wasn't overly well liked. Reasons for this varied from script to story itself and the usual formula trappings of a comic book action flick. Personally, I found it probably a little bit more entertaining than a fair share of the people who make their living on reviewing movies. I found it to be a little cheekier than your typical comic book movie, and I really liked Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock and the voice of Venom. Hardy could still be allowed to be a bit of an imposing guy while still having to do a little bit more comedic turns, having to argue with himself to keep Venom under control or fall down because he punches himself or something. Sure, it's maybe not the greatest of comic book movies, but I really still liked it enough to feature it on an early episode of Monster Mondays way back in 2019. Now, the inclusion of Woody Harrelson as Cletus Cassidy at the very end of the first Venom promised to set up an interesting sequel with Venom's offspring, quote unquote, that's called Venom, being unleashed and possessing a crazy murderer played by a truly great and sometimes scary actor. I was absolutely on board. So 3 years later, here we are. Naturally, the film got its release date shifted around from October of 2020 to October of 2021, thanks to the coronavirus pandemic. And even then, after Shang-Chi hit big back at the early part of September, Sony then moved the release date from mid-October 2021 to early October 2021. But the truth is, the actual principal production of this movie was completed before the pandemic really took off in early 2020. What that means was that this movie kind of sat for a bit. And I really want to believe that the year Sony and Marvel sat on this picture led to changes that ended up changing the final product. I really, really want to believe that. The reasons why I want that to be the case can be found in the fact that this movie is only a 97-minute movie in an age in which most comic book films go at least 120 minutes and sometimes much, much more. The 97 or 105-minute kind of runtime for comic book movies or stuff like this really kind of feels like something from a bygone era of the 90s and the early 2000s. It just feels off. Tom Hardy as Brock and Venom and Michelle Williams are just as good as they were in the first film. Harrelson is great, but it feels like a lot of stuff might be missing. It just doesn't feel like a fully baked idea. There are concepts here to play with, but they all leave you kind of wanting, as far as an exchange for either easy solutions or quick leaps to the next set piece or a comedy beat. I was just left wanting from this. But there are things that I will say that I actually kind of hate about this movie, but it's not something worthy enough for me to give a really low grade, like a truly bad movie. Hate is only the best word to describe my disappointment. It's like one of those things like, I hate to see that, you know? So check this out. Hardy is all the way in on this character, and I can see that being... I can see that as being the reason why people continue to flock to this movie or want to rewatch it later. I can see this being a thing that some of the younger audience, and by the way, the audience I saw this with on a Saturday afternoon was shockingly young. But this may be something that they'll latch onto, and kind of grow up liking this otherwise really mediocre movie more than the adult audience will continue to appreciate. But that's a victim of the very short runtime too. There are plenty of things in the first act of the movie that has Venom and Eddie interacting in a kind of cute way. They love and hate each other simultaneously, and that's fun, but it doesn't quite have the same gravitas that you might want from the two merged characters by the end of this movie. And yes, I said gravitas while talking about Venom, Let There Be Carnage. But another extremely disappointing element of Venom and Eddie's relationship is how Venom kind of wants to be a superhero and is able to do so through Brock's journalism connections and abilities. Venom wants Brock to be successful. He leads him to things that puts Eddie back on top, that instantly makes this a much more interesting movie than what we got. There are things that he does that says, you were a great reporter. I'm going to help you be that great reporter again. There's a character, something there that is really kind of left behind very early, and it's unfortunate. But this could have gone less with the action stuff of Cassidy and his imprisoned girlfriend Shriek, which, by the way, Shriek is an important character in the comics, especially to Cletus Cassidy. She's there. She's sort of important, but not really important for the story as a whole with the movie that we got. But this could have gone more toward a really eerie and creepy near horror style investigation story. Instead, it becomes this kind of overblown action movie that moves very fast and is kind of shockingly boring. And that's the biggest disappointment right there. Tom Hardy and Woody Harrelson have great scenes together, but they needed more of a chess game against one another. This movie has the subtitle, Let There Be Carnage, and it's really pretty mild. You have two monsters, and neither one is all that differentiated from the other beyond who the monsters are bonded to. It's not a great way to build these characters. It really could have used one of those kind of similar but a mere reflection of one another type of feel, where Brock is terrified of Cassidy because he acts on the impulses that Venom wants to act on, and Brock has to constantly and tirelessly reel him in. But then when Cassidy gets his symbiote and becomes Carnage, then you could have him go way more scary than he really is. It actually made me think that the Harrelson character from Natural Born Killers is now just in the same scene in Spider-Man 3 where Tobey Maguire is possessed by the symbiote suit and is dancing around and buying pickup artist clothing off the clearance rack and is just kind of letting loose on his inhibitions. And that's the very first thing I thought of once Cassidy escaped from death row in this movie. And that should not be the very first thing I thought of when Cassidy escaped death row in this movie. Give this movie maybe 15 more minutes. Still keep it under 2 hours. Maybe either trim or cut out some of the lighter life at home with Eddie and Venom stuff. And let this movie breathe more as an R-rated film. And this could have really been something. There's a serial murderer as a character who says very creepy things, is very unpredictable, and is played by Woody Harrelson, and you only spent maybe less than 10 minutes playing with a concept about where he's hidden the bodies of his ghastly murders. The bones of a really, really good creepfest movie with comic book superhero characters is here. But either the script wasn't there, Sony or Marvel or both had cold feet, or it got lost in what I can only assume is a pile of film on the cutting room floor someplace. Whatever it was, Venom Let There Be Carnage ultimately is a huge missed opportunity to really do something quite unique. And I think that's the most I can say about this for now, other than if you do watch this movie, there is a mid-credit scene that I think is going to be quite important and is probably one of the very best scenes of the movie and possibly one of the greater mid or post-credit scenes in Marvel movie history. But leaving it that, I don't want to give any spoilers or anything like that. So check out new episodes of Film Seizure hosted by Jason Oliver, Chuck Moore, and myself each Wednesday morning, and new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by finding us at Film Seizure. And you can find us on several podcasting platforms like SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Audible. You can even subscribe to the show on YouTube if that's where you would like to listen to the shows. Now, I'll be back in 1 week for the movie I've waited too damn long for, so get those vodka martinis shaken and stirred, and join me next time for the review of No Time to Die. Until then, don't forget to save me the aisle seat.